Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third podcast episode of Shaman's Way. Here, as always, is Kriket, and she's going to be telling us about the Shamanic Cosmology of Death.
Which is indeed a very heavy title. The Cosmology of Death, what does that even mean, to be quite frank? There are two of my favorite words when I start to think about where we came from. One of my favorites is cosmogony. Cosmogony gives rise to cosmology. Cosmogony are the building blocks to where our society began. Then once we had cosmogony, we had the four structural stones. We then came to have cosmology. The cosmology became our stories. And our cosmology is how we interpreted, how we lived or we existed with the world that's seen and unseen, but the world always with us and always around us. So when we talk about the cosmology of death, what I'm asking us to do is look at the stories of death in each of the different cultures or in some of the different cultures. One of the leaders in psychopomp work in the Christian mythology are the angels. So we talk about the angels descending into a room of a dying person and lifting their soul or their spirit up to heaven. We hear of intervention spirits. So these same angels are the same angels that stop car accidents because their portal to death for you at that point in time is not open. If we go back even further, we can see within the mythology of the Egyptians, where we have the psychopomp spirits of Horus, where we have the story of Osiris being chopped up into little bits and pieces and being rebuilt again. We have, if we look into our collective story, we see there are lots of discussions around how we die, where we go when we die, and how we are to be helped across in that place and in that space. I think that we live in a time and a place where there are very few, if any, rites to passage. I like to find other stories. How do I lighten my heart? How do I lighten myself in the view of death? The stories that I really like to hear about are the stories of Lady Death. Lady Death isn't spoken of very often, but she comes also in the form of the Valkyrie in the Norse mythology, and those Valkyrie fly across the battlefields, collecting the souls of the fallen soldiers and riding them forth into Valhalla. Lady Death has been a gracious being for me over the years in helping me to move spirits of the dead across. Now, I'm going to stop my story because I think I've gotten just a bit ahead of myself. In the cosmology, we talk about psychopomp beings. So what does even the word psychopomp mean? Psychopomp means the carrier of souls. Swans can be seen as psychopomp beings because they are able to dive deep into the waters. The other animals are, if we see flocks of swallows, oftentimes those have been associated with various Eurasian shamans as means and carriers or psychopomp beings for the spirits of the dead. There are superstitions with respect to animals flying or birds flying into the house, and if a bird flies into the house, it surely means death. We also have a psychopomp being or a being that is associated with death, which is raven. And we think of raven associated with death because raven is one of the animals that cleans the carrion or the dead in our forests. So our ancestors of forest therefore would create stories in relationship to the raven. If you lived in a climate where the golden eagle was one of your primary beings for hunting, such as the Tungus peoples of northern Russia, then you have stories about the psychopomp beings being the golden eagle, those who can let you go or who can carry the dead over and be received as a gift. So psychopomp beings come not only in the form of beautiful angels or in the guise of a black-winged woman named Lady Death, or in the guise of the raven or a golden eagle. As we take just a few minutes to explore some stories, we certainly see that there are many different aspects and many different myths which take us into an understanding of death. There are different traditions which honor death in different ways. One of the understandings or expressions of the deep sorrow of losing a child is in Burundi, Africa. I don't remember the name of the tribe, to be very honest with you. However, the mother, if she loses a child, she is allowed 1 year to stay within her home and to weep and to cry. And she has a choice to make on the 365th day, the anniversary of the death of her child, 366 days. I'm not sure what that is. But anyway, she can either leave the house or she can be burnt with the house. And there is no judgment on her either way. So deep is the grief of losing a child that it is thought of as a release of the soul to be able to cross over to the other side. We certainly don't have that level of respect for death or the process of grieving in the place where we live in Canada. And it is often to our detriment that we do not have traditions or rites of passage for death. So we look to the stories, so we look to the psychopomp beings. In my world, what I like to do is there are something called trance postures. There are various trance postures. I think there's probably 4, possibly 6 trance postures that are specifically for psychopomp. Now this gets into the how to do psychopomp work, not really anymore discussing the cosmology or the story of how to die. We all know that when we die, life ends. But what we also know is that when we die and our physical life ends, our spiritual and our energetic life does not end. We had psychopomp beings in our stories because it was intrinsically understood by our ancestors that our spirits had the ability to stay or to go, and that to be ushered into the next place, to be ushered into whatever your heaven or your summer lands or the land of the dead, wherever you're being ushered into, you had beings helping you along that way. So we have intrinsically known that the spirit does carry on. In that regard, when we have beings here who have no recognition of their death, it is almost a subtle transition from that place of dying to that place of the spirit separating and hopefully being able to be guided up to the Netherlands or the other regions, whatever that heaven or that summer land is for them. If there is not ceremony, if there is not the opportunity for that spirit to cross over, what happens is they get stuck. And here is where we talk about the application of psychopomp work, the application of helping the spirits to cross over. And there are various ways to achieve that. So there are the prayers and the smudging of the house. There are the ways of burying individuals. So we have, whether we have a Jewish ceremony or a high Catholic ceremony, or we have a pagan ceremony that honors and beguiles the dead. You know, that saying, the unsung hero comes specifically from somebody who has died on the battlefield and nobody remembers their song, and so their spirit is left to wander. That's where the term the unsung hero comes from. So we have references in it in our culture, and as we have references to it, we also have the wherewithal as spiritual creatures to be able to perform ceremonies and rituals in order to bring the spirits of the dead over. I want to share with you an interesting story that I had in 2014, I think it was. I was in Portland, Oregon, taking a second workshop on doing psychopomp work, on doing compassionate depossession. And we were supposed to travel to a place where there were great psychopomp beings. And I could have traveled to the pyramids. I could have traveled to any number of places, various mounds, or the various places in Mexico where we've done lots of sacrifices of human beings. I could have gone there, but I really wanted, what is a practical application of this? So in Portland, Oregon, on June 19th, I journeyed to Edmonton, and I journeyed to the High Level Bridge. So accurate was my journey that I was able to tell what the temperature was when I got home a week later. I asked my friends, it was Pride that weekend and I was missing Pride. So I asked what the temperature was and whether it was cloudy or rainy, and what I had experienced in my journey was exactly the weather pattern that Edmonton was experiencing that day, which gave me great validation. What I wanted to talk to were the spirits who took care of the people who committed suicide by diving off the High Level Bridge. And when I went into the journey, I found this amazing angel. Now, since you have that image of your head of, beautiful white wings and clean and clear, get that image out of your head, because it wasn't. It was an angel with tattered gray cloth for its clothing. Its wings were dusty gray and broken here and there, and around his wrists and around his feet were shackles. Iron manacles, iron shackles with chains. And he explained to me that the reason that he had shackles and the reason he looked that way was to appear to the individuals, the people who were committing suicide, that even in suicide, in the ugliness of such a death, there was transcendence and there was hope. And I thought that was amazing, absolutely beautiful. And then I traveled over to the university hospital, and I wanted to go into the ER unit, and I wanted to meet the psychopomp spirits who were there. And I met this native woman who had been a nurse, and she had been a nurse between the 50s and the 60s, and she told me her name. And in the journey, it was such an unusual native name, and I thought, surely there's no name like that at all. And I found this woman's name in a file that I was working on in my particular job, and the age of the woman and the profession of the woman fit exactly this psychopomp spirit that I met at the university hospital in Edmonton. So there are practical applications to the work that we do, and there are practical ways of shedding and sharing love and compassion, regardless of what you think the story of death is. Oftentimes we are left behind because we are attached to a thing, whether that thing be money, whether that thing be how we died. There are many instances where we can all think about it. If we thought about it for 3 minutes, I'm sure most of us can come up with a ghost story, and I think most of us can come up with an actual experience of, a ghost or an apparition coming to us. And I think that we can all exercise our imagination, and we can all come to a place where we have compassion.
So a couple of questions have come to my mind here. One, what does a typical ceremony around Psychopomp entail?
A typical ceremony is, let's go back to something that I talked about very early on called trance postures. And trance postures, I take the work from an anthropologist and PhD by the name of Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And she wrote a book specifically on trance postures. And then her student, Belinda Gore, wrote another book on trance postures. What trance postures are recordings of the different ways that shamans or the medicine people of a group would hold their body. The understanding is that by holding your body in such a way, you're able to activate energy centers in order to transport you to a particular place or to a particular mindset or a particular place in the spirit world. So trance postures are safe ways for people who are fairly uninitiated into the world of spirit work to help spirits cross over without engaging them on a one-to-one basis. So there is one posture, and it is very simple to do a search on Amazon or on any number of sites to find out what a trance posture looks like. And there are, like 5 or 6 that are dedicated just to this, right?
And we'll make sure we put some links in the show notes here.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And the trance postures, we are done and held usually for about 7 minutes because they're bloody hard on the body. Some of them aren't as hard, but some of them you're like, oh my word, what do you mean I have to have my hands up by my ears for 7 minutes? My traps are fucking killing me. Right? So those are really powerful ways of doing ceremony to aid the souls of the dead to cross over. And that's specifically what these postures are designed for. There are many times in the shamanic realm or any type of spiritual world, you're asked to come over to clear someone's house. Somebody has a ghost or an apparition, and we're asked to come over and to help get rid of the knocking in the walls or my shirt. If I hang up my shirt falls, or as we talked, anybody can come up with a ghost story. What that looks like is I try to speak to the spirits of the dead. I'm not a medium. I know and medium is one who allows the spirit of the dead to come through their body and talk. So I'm certainly not a medium by any stretch of the imagination, but I do use simple tools such as my pendulum, and I like to use dowsing rods when I go into a house because they give me an indication of where a certain energy is. And then I set up a journey. So I will take out my drum and I will work my shamanic trance and then speak to the spirits of the house and find out what the spirits of the house need. And if there is a particular ghost, try to heal the pattern of pain for that particular ghost and then allow that spirit to cross over. So those are 2 different ways of doing ceremony for Psychopomp.
Very cool. And because we're dealing with death and because there might be some new listeners out there, is this a safe type of journey work or practice to do?
It certainly has its drawbacks. If someone is going to undertake to do this type of work, what I would strongly recommend is that they follow some simple rules. And the most simple rule when you're journeying for helping the dead is take your power animal with you wherever you go and always have an ally with you. The other rule that I would ask that you follow is, for the love of all that's holy in your world, listen to what you're told. And if you're told not to go somewhere, or if you're told to let go of it, just do it. And if you are journeying alone, make sure that somebody can call you within an hour or half an hour just to make sure that you are all right and that you have come back fully. When we work with the spirits of the dead, there is always an element or an aspect of it that could take you, and not take you like I'm going to take you and you are now mine and I'm possessing you or so on and so forth, but death can leave its mark on you. Death can touch you. And sometimes that comes out when you come out of the journey. You can be incredibly sad, or you can be manifesting emotions that are not yours, or you can have experiences like those spirits follow you from the land of the dead into your house, and so start interrupting things with your house. And I think it's a really good question. Can these things be done safely? I think things can be done safely if they're done with very specific rules. So always bring an ally with you. And even though you think that you are the baddest ass in all the worlds and you're told not to go somewhere, don't think that just because you have the protection of whatever increment or application you have that you're going to be safe if you're just journeying out. There are rules set in place by spirits. And I think what is really incumbent upon us to understand is that the spirit world and the world of spirit operates independent of us and not dependent on us. So if we think we can go in there and we have all the rights in the world and we are perfectly safe, we are folly. It is not your world. You are a part of it. You're in it. You're trying to do good. All the power to you, but play safe.
Excellent advice. Well, we've been talking about psychopomp and this cosmology of death from a shamanic perspective. Any final thoughts?
If I am stuck here on this earth and I don't cross over, I pray that somebody has the compassion to feel for me and help me to cross over and help me to find peace and rest away from the limitations of this physical plane. So with respect to the cosmology of death, I want to ask you to say, what is the story of death as it surrounds you? How has death impacted you in your life? And what are the stories you make up about death? Is the story that when you die, you will die alone? Is the story when you die, you will die surrounded by people you love? Or is your story, as most of us, is your story a mystery? And how will you treat death when death comes to you? Between now and when you pass, can you have a relationship with death? Can you meet death? Our stories have long asked us to visit the death part of ourselves and the death archetype in that sense. So I ask you, can you take the lofty ideals and the large words and make them your own? Can you simplify where you are in this life? Has death impacted you? Can you make friends with death? These are all really interesting questions to ask yourself. And there are many different journeys and shamanic techniques and rites and rituals that introduce you to the very being of death and the very aspect of the things that frighten you the most. So in closing for this particular discussion, I hope that you smile at the end, because although it is a topic that can create such great sorrow, it is also a topic that we have discussed since we first buried the people we loved in the ground, and that was thousands of years ago. So for thousands of years, we know that we are being born, we are being interred in various ways, and we are being respected and rejoiced to return to this land in some form or other. And I encourage you to include that in your story, that you are yet just an ever-present spin on the wheel And as much as you are an individual, you are part of the whole. And I encourage you to tune in again as we explore Waking the Bear the next time we meet. Thank you and have a good night.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Kriket. A very, very cool talk for today's podcast. Hopefully everybody really got something out of that and enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions about what you've heard, head on over to shamansway.net. We have a contact us place and we will absolutely answer your questions. And if you want updates on when new things are coming out, please do sign up for the newsletter there. All right. Thank you, everybody.